Okay, well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Informa webinar on robotic surgery. I'm Tina Tan, the co-editor-in-chief of Medtech Insight, and I'll be hosting the webinar today. I'm joined by my colleagues Gail Grimes, analyst at Meddevicetracker, and Marion Webb, who's managing editor at Medtech Insight. Now, before I go through the agenda about what will be covered by Gail and Marion, I just wanted to reassure our listeners that they will get a copy of the slide deck and a link to the recording after the webinar, so there's no need to start furiously scribbling down notes. Right. Now, I'd like to set the scene a bit first and put into context why it is so timely to have a webinar on this particular subject. Robotics is not a recent buzzword, and the history of robotic surgery actually goes back quite a few decades to the mid-1980s. But many of us know that the noise around robotically assisted surgical technologies, or RAS technologies for short, because that's a bit of a mouthful, has definitely got a lot louder in the last 5 years or so. Now, the benefits of these systems, such as reducing invasiveness, reducing the risk of complications, improving clinical outcomes, all these are getting recognized by both surgeons and patients, and is definitely gaining traction as a standard of care for certain procedures. And it's been reported recently that robotics are especially in demand by surgeons for more challenging cases, such as those hard-to-reach areas and procedures that require suturing and tissue dissection. Now, I've been covering medtech for quite a long time, and I've seen big medtech companies busy adding RAS assets to their portfolio in the last few years or so, even creating new entities dedicated to this area. I'm sure you've all heard of Johnson & Johnson teaming up with Google to set up Verb Surgical. Also, there's more and more venture capital going to innovative RAS technology developers, helping these young companies take their products to market. And so far this year, we've tracked at least 6 venture financing deals involving companies developing robotic-assisted medical devices. And they do include a few pretty sizable Series A's. I'll just name a couple. There's Medical Micro Instruments. Now, they raised $24.5 million for his robotic-assisted suturing device, and one called Vicarious Surgical, which raised $18 million for its RAS system, which has reality-augmented features. And more recently, in fact, it was just this week, a couple of notable financings came through. One was from the French company Quantum Surgical, which closed the first tranche of an expected $50 million Series A. Now, that's pretty big. Quantum is currently in stealth mode, so I haven't got that much information about their technology. But the man behind Quantum also founded Medtech SA, the robotics spine and neurosurgery company that Zimmer Biomet acquired a couple of years ago. The other notable financing this week came from CMR Surgical, a UK firm based in Cambridge, and it has developed a compact portable system called Versius. CMR has raised an impressive $100 million in its Series B round. So this is said to be the biggest private equity round ever for a medical device company in Europe. That money should take CMR through the last leg of its journey to get Versius CE marked, and hopefully we'll see it in the market this year. So they're definitely one to watch. Now, enough from me. I hope this introduction has helped to highlight the growing excitement around robotic surgery. And today, looking through the agenda, Gail will kick off our webinar by taking us through some important figures to give us an idea of just how big the RAS market is and how fast it's growing. She'll also discuss the competitive landscape, starting with a closer look at the market leader, who is, of course, Intuitive Surgical. We know who they are. And then who Intuitive's rivals are. These are companies that also have RAS technologies approved and available in the market. And Gail will discuss how far these competitors are from catching up with Intuitive. And then after Gail, we'll move over to Marion, who will discuss the robotic exoskeleton market. This is still quite a niche segment of the broader robotic devices market, and one that I guess isn't very well understood. But we'll see that it has a lot of growth opportunity. So Marion will give an overview of where this market is currently at, who the players are, the key players are, and the growth drivers. And then we'll end with a Q&A. And remember, listeners, you can send your questions during the webinar by typing your question in the chat box. And with that, I'll hand the reins over to Gail.
Thank you, Tina. As you can see from this slide here, we're showing the market for robotic-assisted surgery is expected to reach $5.3 billion by 2021. Now, I want to provide an overview on Informa's report on the global market for robotic-assisted surgery, or RAS. This market includes RAS systems, associated instrumentation, and service or maintenance contracts. The largest competitor in this market is Intuitive Surgical, whose Davinci systems accounted for more than 753,000 robotic-assisted surgery procedures in 2016. The market for RAS systems is greatly underpenetrated, with robotics penetrating only 5 to 10% of surgical procedures. One of the main factors that will propel growth in the RAS market over the next 5 years is patient demand for minimally invasive surgery. In the U.S., open surgery remains common, particularly in colorectal surgery, ventral hernia repair, and thoracic procedures. Intuitive Surgical reports that there are as many as 4 million surgical procedures that could be performed with robotic-assisted surgery in countries where it currently has regulatory clearances. Another driver of RAS system sales will be approvals for new clinical applications, which will expand the number and type of procedures for which robotic surgery will be used. Further growth in the market will be limited by the high price of these systems, which we will discuss later. This slide presents sales of robotic-assisted surgery systems over the next 5 years, which are projected to grow at a compound annual rate of 11.7%, from $3 billion in 2016 to nearly $5.3 billion in 2021. Instruments and accessories account for the largest share of the market, with approximately 52%, followed by robotic-assisted surgery systems with 29%, and service or maintenance contracts with 19%. This slide shows the breakdown by country or region for the worldwide RAS market. As you can see, the U.S. is the largest country market for sales of robotic surgery systems, with a 71.8% share. Sales in the 5 major EU countries of France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and the UK accounted for 13.7% of sales, followed by Japan with 1.8%, and the rest of the world with 12.7%. The U.S., with its large population of eligible patients and access to health care, will remain the largest market for RAS systems during the forecast period. Worldwide, government approvals of new products in a variety of countries will contribute to growth of the market. For example, in 2016, Intuitive Surgical and its Chinese distribution partner, Fosun Pharma, announced a joint venture to develop robotic-assisted catheter-based medical devices for diagnosis of lung cancer. Pictured here is an image of the Davinci S, which is one of the high-end Intuitive Surgical RAS systems. Robotic-assisted surgery systems enable surgeons to use computer and software technology to control and move surgical instruments through minimally invasive surgery. In addition to the Davinci S, Intuitive Surgical offers lower-cost systems for healthcare facilities that cannot afford a top-of-the-line system. This slide presents procedure volumes by clinical application for Intuitive Surgical's Davinci systems. These robotic-assisted systems were used in nearly 800,000 procedures worldwide in 2016. Currently, the majority of surgical applications for RAS systems are for gynecologic indications, which accounted for 44% of Intuitive Surgical's U.S. procedures. General surgery accounted for 33%. This included bariatric, colorectal, cholecystectomy, or surgical removal of the gallbladder, and hernia procedures. Urology accounted for 19% of U.S. procedures and other procedures for 4%. Nearly 90% of prostate procedures in the U.S. are performed with a RAS device and nearly 85% of malignant hysterectomy. Outside the U.S., urology is the primary specialty that uses robotic surgery, accounting for nearly 200,000 procedures a year. Other clinical applications that have been approved for robotic-assisted surgery include orthopedics for joint replacement and abdominal surgery, brain and spine surgeries, and cardiac and peripheral vascular procedures. Other companies that are currently marketing RAS systems include multinational device companies such as Smith & Nephew, Stryker, and Zimmer Biomet, in addition to small privately held companies such as Catheter Precision and Omni. On this slide, we show the market share of the companies who were the leading competitors in the market in 2016. As you can see here, Intuitive Surgical dominated the global market for robotic-assisted surgery with approximately $2.7 billion in sales and nearly a 90% market share. A number of other competitors held single-digit shares, including Accuray, Stryker, and Maser Robotics. Zimmer Biomet entered the market in 2016 when it acquired French company Medtech and its ROSA guidance and positioning system for brain and spine procedures. Think Surgical, Stereotaxis, and Zimmer Biomet each had around $16 to $17 million in sales of RAS systems in 2016. Other suppliers included Corindus Vascular Robotics, Renishaw, Smith & Nephew, and Transentrix, among others. Intuitive Surgical was the first company with a robotic surgery system approved for marketing in the U.S. In 2000, it received FDA approval for the Davinci for use in general laparoscopic surgery. Currently, the company is seeking to increase its sales by expanding use of the Davinci for procedures that are performed primarily via open surgery. However, a number of smaller competitors are expected to gain market share over the next 5 years as new robotic systems see greater surgeon adoption. Globus Medical entered the RAS market in 2017 when it launched Excelsius GPS for spine surgery. And Verb Surgical, a collaboration of Johnson & Johnson and Verily, is developing a system they project will launch in 2020, but the company has been short on details. We do know that this technology will target thoracic, colorectal, and oncology applications. And in a recent interview with Medtech Insight, the CEO of Verb Surgical distinguished his company from other RAS companies by characterizing it more as a digital solutions company, with their products including a robotics element, as well as other elements such as artificial intelligence. Now on this slide, we list the average sales price of RAS systems. The highest priced system on the market is Intuitive Surgical's Davinci, which includes various priced models, ranging from $550,000 to $2.5 million. The next most expensive system is Transentrix's Senhance for general surgery and gynecologic applications, which is priced between $1.8 and $2 million. Stryker's Mako system for joint replacement is approximately $1 million. A number of other systems are priced below $1 million, including Medrobotics and Titan Medicals. Companies are developing lower-cost, robot-like instruments to target smaller hospitals and medical centers in remote areas in developing countries. For example, in January 2017, FlexDex Surgical launched the FlexDex instrument, which sells for $500 and essentially is a wrist-mounted needle driver with robotic functionality. The device enables one-to-one mapping of the surgeon's arm and hand motions to an articulating instrument inside the patient's body. Now that concludes my presentation on the robotic-assisted surgery market. Now I will hand it over to Marion Webb, who will provide an overview of the exoskeletons market.
Yes, thank you, Gail, and thank you, Gina, for your kind introduction. So in my presentation, I'll be talking about exoskeletons, the biggest players, the competitive landscape, and some of the growth factors and challenges. So when most people hear the word exoskeleton, they often think about the bulky, heavyweight devices that we've seen in movies such as Avatar or The Alien. And the first exoskeletons that were developed for commercial use resembled those bulky designs. But today's medical exoskeletons are much more sophisticated. To give a very simplistic explanation of the design of an exoskeleton for a lower limb, so it's essentially a battery-driven wearable robot that has motors at the hips and the knees that assist the person with driving their legs forward. So when a person is completely paralyzed, the exosuit essentially provides all the power needed to help that person move forward, versus for individuals who have some underlying ability to walk, which is typically the case for stroke patients. The device is smart enough to figure out how much assistance to give a person to take a step or finish a step. According to an article in the Lancet Neurology Journal, industry insiders valued the U.S. exoskeleton market at about $1.8 billion by 2025 and expect some 100,000 robotic exoskeletons will be sold and in use by then. The exoskeletons that have been cleared by the FDA to date are limited to treating people with spinal cord injuries and stroke. And the companies will argue that these devices can help patients relearn walking faster and also have the potential to improve physical strength and emotional well-being, and can also help reduce medical complications that are associated with being in a wheelchair, though the scientific proof is still lacking. In addition, many exoskeleton companies are already working on devices that they hope will eventually help other mobility challenged persons, and those would be people with Parkinson's disease, MS, cerebral palsy, or even for the elderly at home. So that would be all the growth drivers. But there are also significant barriers to growth, with reimbursement from private insurers being among the biggest challenge, and given the high cost of the device, and also there's a lack of standard of care today. The big three exoskeleton companies that have received FDA clearance for treating spinal cord injuries are ReWalk Robotics, Exobionics, and Parker-Hannifin Corporation. ReWalk, which is based in Israel, was the first company to obtain the CE mark in 2010 and also received FDA clearance in 2014 to treat spinal cord injury patients for personal use and in the rehab setting. ReWalk is currently developing a soft suit, which is called the Restore, that it hopes to introduce in Europe and the US next year, provided they receive regulatory clearance. Exobionics developed an exoskeleton that has also been available in Europe since 2012 and was cleared by the FDA in 2016. But an important distinction here is that the Exo GT has been cleared for both spinal cord injury and the much, much bigger stroke patient market, but can only be used in the rehab setting, not for personal use. Meanwhile, Parker-Hannifin received the CE mark in 2015 and US clearance in 2016, which was expanded in 2017 for broader use, also in the rehab and personal setting. And earlier this year, the company had a big win when it received US clearance to market its Indigo exosuit to stroke patients in the rehab setting as well. And now I'm going to go into a bit more detail about the individual companies that were just mentioned. So as I mentioned before, ReWalk was the first company to receive US FDA clearance. And last year, the company placed 107 systems total, which was down from 119 placed during 2016. In the U.S., reimbursement from private insurers remains a major obstacle. When I spoke to the CEO, Larry Davinci, in April, ReWalk was planning to present proposals to 25 U.S.-based insurers prior to policy review. And so far, 42 insurers in the U.S. have paid for the device, but he told me that it's been a drawn-out process. Meanwhile, the company has made some progress in Europe, with insurance providers in Italy and Germany agreeing to provide reimbursement. If you look to the right, you'll see the company's next generation Restore device for stroke patients. That device is currently being evaluated for safety and efficacy in a 40-patient trial at the Spalding Rehab Hospital in Boston. And the company will use that data to submit for FDA clearance and hopeful approval by year-end, which would put it on the market in 2019. Reimbursement won't be an issue here because the suit will be placed in stroke rehab clinics where there are already codes in place to pay for gait training. Moving on to the next company, Parker's Indigo was the second exoskeleton to win FDA clearance for treating spinal cord injury patients in February 2016. The device breaks down into 5 components. So essentially, it's a hip to upper and to lower leg pieces, and it also comes in 3 sizes, small, medium, and large, and that allows clinicians to optimize the fit. At 26 pounds, it's also lightweight and easy to transport. So the company doesn't make its exoskeleton sales figures public, but management told me that it sold well over 100 units in the last 2 years, mainly for clinical use, and they expect more growth on the personal side as well. The new stroke indication by the FDA, which was given this January, opens up a huge window of opportunity for Parker as well. The next company, Exoskeletons, GT, was actually the first exoskeleton to be cleared by the FDA for stroke patients and spinal cord injuries in April 2016 in the rehab setting. And in 2017, the company sold 61 Exo GT units, up from 40 in 2016, with the majority of sales being in U.S. hospitals. The company has recently shifted its marketing strategy, with 5 salespeople now marketing the device in 5 U.S. regions, or I should say 5 regions in the U.S., which the CFO told me has already paid off, with some 20 devices being sold in the last quarter, compared to an average of 10 to 15 units being sold a quarter during previous quarters. So the company is now also offering a rental option, which ReWalk and Parker have been offering all along. This February, Exo also expanded its WISE study, which evaluates 160 patients with incomplete spinal cord injury at 10 centers to evaluate the improvement in independent gait speeds with the Exo GT compared to standard of care. And the hope is to use positive data to apply for reimbursement from CMS. So as you can see in this slide, the spinal cord injury market is about 280,000 individuals in the U.S., of which about half could potentially qualify for an exoskeleton, and that's according to ReWalk. That compares to roughly 800,000 annual stroke patients in the U.S. and Europe. One analyst estimated that the stroke market in China is even bigger, namely 3 times bigger than in the U.S., with the numbers of rehab centers surpassing the U.S. and Europe by 2021. And ReWalk CEO certainly plans to tap into that market with its new Restore suit. ReWalk recently signed a deal with Hong Kong-based Timwell Corporation to develop and market the new soft suit in China, and then eventually also the ReWalk. What's interesting is that Parker told me that they have no plans to enter the Chinese market, citing intellectual property concerns among some other concerns. And Exo has been focusing on marketing the Exo GT to hospitals, but the CFO told me that they're waiting for reimbursement to market the device to individuals. As far as cost is concerned, you can see here that the price range is quite large, with ReWalk charging $80,000 to $85,000 for the ReWalk device, but plans to bring the price down significantly for the Restore device, which I was told uses many of the same technologies of the first generation device, but stripped away a lot of the bulk of the rigid exoskeleton, which makes it 1/7 of the weight. Parker's device is listed as $98,000 for individuals and $175,000 for the clinic. But I was told that the clinic essentially gets a set of 3 devices. As I mentioned before, the device comes in small, medium, and large, and that allows physiotherapists to mix and match to fit each person properly. Exo GT costs $160,000 and comes with a 4-year, $40,000 care package, and it has a next-generation gait therapy software that allows physiotherapists to customize programming. On the spinal cord injury side, ReWalk and Parker both sell to the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, which is the largest institution to provide coverage for individuals with spinal cord injury. And what makes the VA unique is that it's both a hospital system and a payer. So they use devices in the hospital and also pay for the devices that vets can use at home. On the stroke side, meanwhile, Exo and Parker market their devices in the rehab center, noting that the FDA has not cleared an exoskeleton for stroke use for patients at home at this point. But with some 800,000 annual stroke patients in the U.S. alone, that represents a huge market opportunity that ReWalk certainly hopes to tap into next year as well with its Restore device. All of the companies that I just mentioned are also working on exoskeletons that could help other mobility challenged individuals, such as people with MS, Parkinson's disease, and cerebral palsy, and also the elderly. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Marion. A really interesting presentation. I don't think you were wrong in saying, Marion, right at the beginning, how people still think of exoskeletons as something like a cyborg armor that you'd see in a sci-fi film. I think that's there are a lot of misconceptions around this product area, and I don't believe many understand the potential this market segment holds. Now, we'll be getting back to Marion later with some questions, and remember, listeners, you can keep sending us your questions either to Marion or to Gail or even to me. Just type them in the chat box, so keep them coming. And even if we run out of time and are not able to respond during this webinar, we will follow up with you individually afterwards. But now we'll turn to Gail first. So Gail, lots of great market data there in your slides. The forecast here, I believe you said, was that worldwide sales of RAS systems will grow at around 12% to hit $5.3 billion by 2021. Now that's a healthy double-digit growth rate. So what are the drivers that will push growth? Now, I mean, you mentioned them early on in your presentation, but I do think it's important to underline just what the drivers are that are giving investors the confidence to put their money in this space.
Yes, Tina, thank you. Patient demand for minimally invasive surgery is one of the key drivers in the robotic-assisted surgery market. Minimally invasive surgery has many advantages for both the patient and the clinical outcomes for surgery, as we know. And for surgeons, robotic-assisted surgery provides advantages in the operating field in terms of surgical guidance and navigation and the possibility for reduced radiation exposure. Now, growth in general surgery procedure volumes, such as hernia repair, colorectal surgeries, and robotically assisted prostate surgery, and early-stage kidney cancer procedures in regions outside of the U.S. will drive market growth. And moderate growth is expected in the gynecologic and urologic procedures.
Okay, so we're talking about patient demand for better outcomes, surgeons also demanding better and safer work tools, and then there's also the organic growth from procedure volume increases. You broke down the different procedures that RAS systems are used in. Let's talk about these procedures where robotics is still not widely adopted. So which are the newer applications of RAS that have been approved more recently?
Well, robotic systems have only recently become available for spinal surgeries, and use of these systems in spine and orthopedics is expected to rise over the coming years. Globus Medical launched the Excelsius GPS guidance and positioning robot for spine and orthopedic procedures in 2017, and Maser Robotics launched the Maser X for spine and brain applications in the U.S. in 2016, and its Renaissance system was launched for spine applications in 2015 and for brain surgery in 2014. Sales of the product are benefiting from Maser Robotics' agreement with Medtronic to co-market the Maser X, In return for a $72 million to $125 million equity investment from Medtronic, the company now has global distribution rights for the Maser X for spine applications. Other companies include Smith & Nephew, which has the Navio surgical system cleared in the U.S. for total knee replacement. And we have Stryker's Mako system, which is cleared for total hip replacement. And then another significant new FDA clearance was Intuitive Surgical's Davinci SP platform for single-port approaches, which just received FDA approval last week for urologic procedures. The Davinci SP was cleared and CE marked in 2014, but commercial launch was delayed to make the product compatible with the Davinci Xi, and the system has been upgraded to include fourth-generation technologies and an updated interface. The company expects to launch the product in the third quarter of this year, and the market launch of a single-port platform will drive conversion of many laparoscopic procedures to robotic-assisted surgery.
Yeah, I can imagine that's big news for Intuitive, and will probably keep them leaders for quite a while yet. So you mentioned about this single port platform, the SP platform of the Davinci. Just a quick follow-up question. They got the expanded FDA clearance for urologic procedures for SP. Are there any other procedures that, a single port approach or natural orifice approach is particularly suitable for?
Yes, the single port approach is intended for colorectal, head and neck, and urologic procedures. And then other companies are developing platforms for natural orifice surgery also. Titan Medical launched its port system in 2016 for abdominal surgery and gynecologic and urologic indications. And EndoMaster is developing a product for gastrointestinal tumor removal that it seeks to launch in Europe by the end of this year.
Oh, right. Okay, I have heard of EndoMaster before. They're a Singaporean company, and I recall actually interviewing the CEO, the founder of EndoMaster a few years ago. So it's good to see that they're still going strong, and that possibly they will have a product out in the market soon. All right, thanks. Just a quick reminder to listeners, do send us your questions by typing them in the chat box on your screen. It's very easy, and either Gail or Marion will get back to you depending on what the question is. So let's get back to Gail. I haven't quite let you off the hook yet. We talked about market drivers. So how about the challenges, the growth limiters? And one obvious one in the RAS market is the cost of these systems. They often require a big upfront investment. What are companies doing to address this?
Well, the cost of these systems are expensive upfront, and also per procedure costs are high. The per procedure cost for the Davinci can range from $700 to $3,500. And system maintenance expenses range from $80,000 to $170,000 a year. To address the concern about costs, companies are launching products at lower price points to target clients that are unable to afford these higher price systems. Also, many suppliers are offering the option of leasing a product as an alternative to purchasing a system outright. Now, as mentioned earlier, simple endoscopic hand tools and visualization systems that have robotic-like features, such as the FlexDex by FlexDex Surgical, are being marketed to compete against complete robotic surgical systems.
Right. So since we're on the subject of pricing, what about the reimbursement situation with RAS? I mean, reimbursement often helps drive uptake of technology. Can you just refresh our memory, Gail, in terms of what's the reimbursement situation is like for robotically assisted surgical systems?
Well, reimbursement is generally determined by the medical necessity of the primary surgical procedure. Established procedures are generally reimbursable as a minimally invasive surgery.
Okay. So, all right then. One last question. We talked about commercial concerns. Now, how about technical challenges? The picture that I saw, of Davinci, and I've actually seen one live as well in our hospital, it's a very complex, big machine to operate, and some surgeons have expressed concerns about the learning curve associated with these systems. Just say exactly, how long does it take for a surgeon to learn how to use a system? A robotic system?
Well, for more complex systems, it takes quite a bit longer. For example, a study published in the British Journal of Urology analyzed the learning curve for robotic-assisted laparoscopic prostatectomy using a 4-arm Davinci robotic system. It was found that for every 50 cases performed by a single surgeon, there is significantly less blood loss. Now, after 150 cases, complications decreased greatly. For less complex systems, such as the Mako for joint replacement, a learning curve of 10 procedures has been reported.
Right, that's quite a big discrepancy there. Well, thank you, Gail. Okay, now let's go over to Mariana with some questions regarding exoskeletons. Now, Mariana, we talked about the growth opportunities for these devices. That's mainly expanding the use of this technology beyond the spinal cord injury patient pool and then moving more into stroke rehabilitation. And you mentioned patients that have motor disorders and impaired mobility. What about the barriers? Because they do seem quite significant. You highlighted reimbursement as a major challenge. It's not that it isn't there, but it's just it's quite a challenge for companies like ReWalk to gain the reimbursement coverage for their products. Can you perhaps delve a bit more into, how companies like ReWalk, their specific challenges and what they're trying to do to overcome this?
Yeah, sure, Tina. So as you just said, yes, reimbursement certainly is one of the biggest hurdles for these companies. And while ReWalk has made some strides in Europe, in particular, as I mentioned, in Germany and Italy, that effort continues. And I was also told that they continue their efforts in the U.S. But so far, reimbursement has only happened on a case-by-case basis. And the CEO told me that it's been quite a drawn-out process to get insurance companies on board here. And other companies are certainly watching what's happening with ReWalk and are also hoping to make strides, as seen with Exo, which hopes to use its positive data from its ongoing trial to get gap coverage from CMS. So we'll have to see how that pans out. And of course, the high cost of the device makes it very challenging to market the device to individuals. The other challenge that we haven't talked that much about is there are no standards in place, specifically to lower limb exoskeletons, though there are some joint working groups that are working on developing these standards today. And then, of course, safety is another big concern for obvious reasons. I mean, if someone has a fall with an exoskeleton, it can lead to quite severe injuries. One analyst said that so far we have great anecdotal evidence suggesting that these devices are beneficial, but there has not been a big randomized trial to formally compare traditional rehab to exoskeleton-guided rehab, so that would also be helpful.
Yeah, I guess these companies got enough data in their trials that they did to get those regulatory clearances. But of course, we know that with reimbursement, you need even more data. And I guess it's not just exoskeleton companies, facing these difficulties. I think any technologies that don't address life-threatening diseases are more for rehabilitative purposes do face these challenges. You spoke in great detail about the big three established exoskeleton players. Who are the small innovators worth noting in this space?
Yeah, so obviously there are several emerging companies that are working in this space, and too many to mention in this kind of forum, but there are certainly a few worth noting. And one of them is Japan-based Cyberdyne. They actually obtained FDA clearance to market its device in 2017. But it's worth noting that the device was cleared for medical use as a gait training device to temporarily improve walking. what's different about Cyberdyne's device, which is called HALE, and that stands for Hybrid Assistive Limb, is that it uses electromyography sensors collected from the user's muscles and nervous system to control the device. And the goal here is to show temporary ambulation improvement when the patients are not wearing the device after completing the gait training program. Cyberdyne is also having its eye on the stroke market, given the size, and they're currently in clinical trials with the HALE for that indication in Japan as well. Another company that's worth noting is SUITX, and that's spelled SUITX. That company was founded by UC Berkeley professor Casaruni, and it's worth noting that he also founded Exo. Casaruni is considered a pioneer in the field of robotics. He's done a lot of work on industrial robots and also on medical robots. And SUITX's Phoenix was specifically designed to be one of the lightest exoskeletons, most cost-effective and low-profile suits to help people with spinal cord injury walk again. The Phoenix, like a lot of the other models, is also already available in Europe, but is currently in a multi-center study in the U.S. and Hong Kong for U.S. data submission to file for clearance. So they're hoping to get FDA clearance as well.
Yeah, I think making exoskeletons more user-friendly, with a low profile and keeping the costs down is definitely one way to keep advancing the technology and expanding the market a bit more. And I'm not so sure though about Cyberdyne's HALE, because I'm not sure if the inventor of that technology ever watched 2001: Space Odyssey, because it doesn't seem like a very auspicious name to give a technology.
Yeah.
Anyway, great. I think that's a good place to end this webinar. Listeners, I hope you have all found this helpful. And remember, if you have submitted a question and we did not get around to answering it, we'll follow it up after the webinar. Now, before we bring this session to a close, I've just brought a slide up about our inaugural Medtech Insight Awards, which is taking place in Philadelphia on September the 23rd, which is the eve of AdvaMed's MedTech conference. Now, we're organizing the awards in partnership with AdvaMed, and it's an opportunity for us to recognize all the great innovation that this industry is generating. And we definitely know from our webinar today that there's a lot of innovation just within the area of robotics. We're now accepting nominations, so do take a look at our website. The deadline for entries is June 22nd, and you'll get all the details of the different categories on our website. And please don't let this opportunity slip. With that, I'd like to thank Gail and Marion again for their presentations, and of course to you, the listeners, for joining in our webinar. Everyone who registered for this webinar will be getting a link to the recording and a copy of the slide deck emailed to them. With that, I wish you all a good rest of the day. Many thanks.